In the early stages of the Pacific War, Allied forces encountered a variety of Japanese infantry weapons, rifles, grenades, light machine guns. But one device, in particular, drew laughter and disbelief from American and Australian troops: a small, handheld explosive charge attached to a long bamboo pole. To Allied observers, it looked primitive, even absurd. Reports from early engagements described it as a crude stick with a metal can at the end. Soldiers joked that it was something a farmer would make in his backyard. But Japanese infantry manuals gave it a serious name: the Type 3 anti-tank mine, often referred to informally as a lunge mine. Designed for close-quarters combat, it required a soldier to run directly at an enemy tank, slam the charge into the hull, and detonate it instantly. Allied intelligence initially dismissed it as impractical. Officers believed no one would survive long enough to use such a weapon. They were wrong. The weapon was crude, simple, and about to prove far deadlier than anyone expected. By 1943, Japan faced a growing crisis on every front. Its industry was strained, steel production was dropping, and armored forces were hopelessly outclassed by American and Commonwealth tanks. 1. Japan's tank problem. Most Japanese tanks like the Type 95 Hago and Type 97 Kiha had thin armor, weak guns, and poor survivability against Sherman tanks. Japanese commanders knew they could not rely on armored vehicles to stop Allied advances. 2. Infantry as the anti-tank solution. Instead of building more tanks, Japan shifted its strategy. Give every infantry platoon a way to destroy enemy armor at close range. The result was a family of last resort weapons: explosive satchel charges, magnetic mines, suicide charges, and finally, the Type 3 lunge mine. 3. Cheap, fast, and deadly. The lunge mine required almost no steel and could be mass-produced using bamboo poles, a shaped charge cone, a simple pressure detonator. It didn't need training, machinery, or high technology. It only needed a soldier willing to get close enough to a tank, a sacrifice Japan believed many were prepared to make. By late 1943, thousands of these weapons were flowing into frontline units. And soon, Allied troops would learn just how effective and deadly this primitive joke could be. The first serious reports of the lunge mine appeared during fighting in New Guinea and the Solomons in 1944. Allied patrols initially dismissed the odd bamboo poles found on Japanese bodies. Some assumed they were tools, flags, or homemade spears. That changed abruptly. 1. A Sherman tank disabled in seconds. Australian infantry near Saddleburg recorded the first confirmed kill. A Japanese soldier sprinted out of the jungle, holding the long bamboo pole. The Sherman commander assumed it was a scare tactic until the soldier thrust the metal cone directly into the hull. The explosion blew a hole through the armor, killing the assistant driver instantly and disabling the tank. Survivors later wrote, "We thought it was a joke until the tank stopped dead." 2. Sudden appearance in jungle fighting. In New Guinea's dense terrain, tanks often move slowly. Japanese soldiers used this to close the distance, attacking from ravines, thick vines, and blind corners. Allied tank crews began reporting men with poles charging from 10 meters away, impossible to spot in time. 3. Shock across the Pacific Command. American commanders quickly issued new warnings. The lunge mine is to be treated as a serious anti-tank threat. What once looked primitive now proved devastating. The Allies stopped laughing. The weapon worked, and it would claim many more tanks before the war ended. The Type 3 lunge mine was simple, but its design made it far more dangerous than it appeared. 1. A true shaped charge. Despite the bamboo shaft and crude appearance, the explosive head used a shaped charge warhead, similar in principle to the American bazooka and German Panzerfaust. When pressed against armor, it focused explosive force into a narrow jet capable of burning through 70-80 millimeters of steel, punching clean holes through Sherman's side armor, igniting fuel or killing crew instantly. 2. The trigger mechanism. The weapon worked on impact pressure. When the pole struck the tank, a metal rod pushed into the detonator, activating the shaped charge. There was no delay, no fuse, no timer. The explosion was immediate. 3. Why it was so deadly. Because the charge had to be physically pressed against the armor, it always exploded at the optimal distance. This ensured maximum penetration, something even bazooka rounds couldn't guarantee. 4. The cost to the user. The weapon's effectiveness came at a fatal price. The explosion's blast radius was too close for survival. Japanese manuals admitted the operator would die. This is why Allied troops found the concept unbelievable, yet it worked exactly as designed. By mid-war, the lunge mine had already become one of the most feared infantry anti-tank weapons in the Pacific. As the Pacific Campaign intensified, the lunge mine appeared in several major battles, each time forcing Allied tank crews to change tactics. 1. New Guinea, 1943-44. Japanese soldiers used dense jungle terrain to approach tanks undetected. In the fighting near Saddleburg and Shaggy Ridge, Australian units recorded multiple cases where lunge mine operators disabled Sherman tanks, Matilda tanks, and even armored bulldozers clearing jungle paths. Reports noted that attacks occurred at extreme close range, often less than 5 meters. 2. The Philippines, 1944-45. During the battles for Leyte and Luzon, U.S. tank crews faced coordinated suicide charges. Teams of 2 or 3 Japanese infantrymen rushed Sherman tanks. One carried the lunge mine. Others provided covering fire or distraction. These attacks destroyed several tanks near roadblocks, river crossings, and village streets. 3. Okinawa, 1945. On Okinawa, the bloodiest ground battle of the Pacific, the lunge mine reached its highest use. American Marines reported entire platoons of Japanese infantry launching surprise assaults from cave entrances, trenches, and shell craters. The U.S. 6th Marine Division noted, the lunge mine was deployed with complete disregard for life. Even heavily armored Sherman jumbo variants suffered damage when hit at the side or rear. Is wealth prose? The weapon's crude appearance had hidden a lethal reality. In the right terrain, with determined operators, it could kill Allied armor as effectively as modern anti-tank weapons. The lunge mine didn't just destroy tanks. It terrified the men who fought against it. 1. A new kind of threat. Most Allied soldiers were trained to expect machine gun fire, artillery, ambushes, snipers. But a soldier running straight at a tank with an explosive on a pole was something completely new and deeply unsettling. U.S. tank crews wrote in after-action reports that they constantly expected a Japanese soldier to burst from a ditch or cave and rush the tank. This fear changed the way crews behaved inside their tanks. Hatches stayed locked more often. Gunners scanned every bush. Commanders refused to advance without infantry protection. 2. Close-range combat stress. The lunge mine only worked at contact distance, meaning the attacker had to reach the tank. For Allied crews, that meant every piece of terrain. A hedge, a hole, a tree stump became a potential threat. Tankers described the tension as exhausting because a single soldier could kill a tank and its entire crew. The attack gave almost no warning. There was no time to react once the charge was triggered. 3. Infantry under pressure. Infantrymen had the opposite stress. They had to protect the tanks from the attackers. This meant patrolling ahead of armor, clearing trenches, checking caves, guarding the flanks. If they failed, the tank and their friends inside could be destroyed in one explosive second. 4. A weapon that shook confidence. On Okinawa, several tank battalions reported temporary morale drops after a series of successful lunge mine attacks. One Marine sergeant wrote, "You can stop a tank with steel, but you can't stop a man who doesn't care if he dies." The lunge mine forced Allied officers to rethink tactics and forced soldiers to confront an enemy unlike anything they had seen in Europe. The Japanese lunge mine was terrifying, effective, and brutally simple. But the Allies eventually discovered how to counter it. Not quickly, not easily, but decisively. Loose forward every 3. 1. The first clue: understanding the attack pattern. Understanding the attack pattern. Early reports showed a clear pattern. Lunge mine attacks almost always happened at very close range, from hidden positions during chaotic moments of battle. Once Allied commanders realized this, they adjusted tactics. Never let tanks advance alone. Infantry had to stay tight with armor sometimes, so close their hands touched the steel. This was the beginning of the strategy that would eventually stop the weapon. There was no Vermissend. 2. New rules for tank crews. Allied armored divisions issued specific orders. Keep all hatches closed in close combat. A single lunge mine could blow the turret hatch off and kill everyone inside. Use coaxial and hull machine guns constantly. Crews were told to fire short bursts at suspicious ground movement. Stay moving. A stopped tank was a dead tank. The lunge mine required contact, so if a tank kept rolling, attackers struggled to get close. This no here is in Pei's time. 3. Infantry shields. Infantry squads adopted a method called tank shielding. Scouts checked every ditch and cave first. Riflemen guarded both sides of the tank. Flamethrower teams burned out hiding spots. Grenadiers cleared trenches ahead of the advance. This tactic dramatically reduced lunge mine attacks, but it was physically and mentally draining. In the used abilities. 4. The big breakthrough: fire and smoke. On Luzon and Okinawa, U.S. Marines discovered a shockingly effective tool: white phosphorus grenades and tank-mounted flamethrowers. Thick white smoke blinded lunge mine attackers. Flamethrower tanks incinerated hiding spots from a distance. One Marine officer wrote, "Once we burned every cave in the ridgeline, the lunge mines stopped. The 17 is bed. 2 out." 5. Specialized weapons to shotgun the attackers. Late in the war, tanks received improved periscope visibility, better spotlights, and in that case, stronger hull machine guns, anti-personnel grenades that could be dropped from the tank. These innovations made it nearly impossible for a lone soldier to approach unseen. If we created 6. Turning the tide. By mid-1945, the Japanese lunge mine was no longer the unstoppable terror it once was. Allied troops had learned how it worked, how it killed, and how to prevent the attack from ever happening. But it came at a cost: hundreds of destroyed tanks and thousands of soldiers forced into psychological combat against an enemy who didn't fear death. By 1945, the Japanese Empire was collapsing. Cities burned, supplies vanished, soldiers starved. But one thing did not disappear: the willingness to die with a weapon in hand. And so, even as defeat became inevitable, the lunge mine remained one of Japan's final, desperate battlefield tools. The next 3. 1. Okinawa, the weapon's bloodiest stage. Okinawa was the last major island battle, and the lunge mine appeared everywhere. Japanese soldiers hid in collapsed tunnels, burnt-out buildings, drainage ditches, under broken bridges, even beneath American tanks. One Marine recalled, "You never looked at a bush the same way again. Anything that didn't move was suspicious." The psychological fear alone slowed entire U.S. tank columns. Disaster. End quote. 2. Suicide squads formed from teenagers. By late 1945, the Japanese army had so few trained soldiers left that teenagers, some only 15 or 16 years old, were given lunge mines and ordered to stop tanks. Many had no real uniforms, no helmets, barely any training. Just a wooden pole with explosives and one sentence of instruction: aim for the tracks, do not return. This remains one of the darkest chapters of the Pacific War. 3. New, crude variants of the lunge mine. Because factories were bombed and materials were scarce, late war versions became more primitive. Bamboo poles instead of metal, scrap iron fragmentation cases, homemade explosives, mismatched detonators, even stones tied with wire for weight. But they still worked if they reached the tank. And that was the terrifying part. In Wells. 4. The cornered animal effect. Japanese commanders knew the war was unwinnable, but they wanted to make every Allied advance as costly as possible. They used lunge mine fighters as ambush forces in ravines, night raiders, decoys to slow armor, shock units to break tank formations. It was brutal, desperate warfare, the kind that leaves scars on every survivor. In Report 5. When the weapon finally faded. By the time the Americans reached mainland Japan's doorstep, lunge mine attacks had nearly disappeared. Not because the weapon failed, but because there was no one left to use it. The final defenders lacked manpower, explosives, training, and most importantly, time. The war was about to end. By the war's final months, the lunge mine had become more than a weapon. It was a symbol of desperation, sacrifice, and the brutal reality of ground combat in the Pacific. Even though it was simple, primitive, and dangerous to the user, the weapon forced the Allied armies to change how they fought. And that is why, despite being mocked at first, it became one of the most feared Japanese anti-tank tools of World War II. And Riso 1. What the lunge mine actually achieved. Historians still debate the exact number of tanks destroyed, but battlefield reports confirm U.S. Marines lost multiple tanks on Cape Gloucester. Army units were forced to change attack routes. Sherman crews refused to advance without infantry screens. Allied officers added counter-suicide attack drills to training. Engineers began installing improvised armor plates and wire mesh. The weapon was low-tech, but its effect was high-impact. There are Mayan, too. Why it worked, despite being ridiculous. 1. It ignored armor thickness. Instead of trying to pierce the turret or glacis, the lunge mine targeted weak spots: tracks, fuel tanks, lower hull, engine plates. One hit in the right place stopped a 30-ton tank instantly. 2. It required no fuel, no training, no manufacturing base. Japan could no longer build advanced weapons, but it could still make wood poles, shaped charges, simple detonators. In a collapsing empire, this mattered. 3. It exploited an American weakness. Allied tanks had excellent firepower, but terrible visibility. A single soldier could get close enough if he used jungle cover, smoked ground, destroyed buildings. Night operations. The U.S. Army learned this the hard way. It is live the Crees. 3. What Allied soldiers thought of the weapon. At first, a joke. Later, a nightmare. Veterans recalled, "You checked every shadow, every hole, every rock. They came out of nowhere. the explosion always hit low. That was the worst fear. It wasn't the weapon. It was the man using it. The psychological effect lasted long after the war. A to B, A to Zer. 4. What happened to the weapon after World War II? Unlike many Japanese inventions, the lunge mine was not copied by post-war armies. Why? Because every army recognized the same truth. The weapon required a soldier to die for it to work. Modern militaries replaced it with rocket launchers, recoilless rifles, high-explosive anti-tank grenades, guided missiles. But historians still study the lunge mine as an example of extreme last-resort warfare. 1. DRI. 5. The final legacy. The lunge mine did not win battles. It did not save the Japanese Empire. It did not change the war's outcome. But it forced one of the strongest armies in the world to adapt its tactics. With nothing more than a wooden pole, a cone of explosives, and soldiers willing to die. That is why this forgotten, ridiculous weapon became one of the most unexpectedly effective tank killers of World War II.